Yeah, I want to make sure you.
All right, we are being recorded. I found the button and we are ready to go. So welcome everybody. Welcome. My name is Donny Lowbrey.
And I'm Kirk Prime.
And we are delighted to welcome you back to yet another episode of Queer Tribes.
Yes.
Where we have the chance to interview gay luminaries and find out about what they're thinking. And today we are delighted to welcome Don Shewey. Welcome, Don.
Thank you for inviting me on to this into this adventure.
Oh yes,
Thank
yes,
you.
it's a pleasure. We have some questions to ask, but before we do that, I have a little bio I'm going to read in case some people are not familiar with your work and have an idea of all the fascinating things that you have been and you are. Don Shewey is a writer, therapist, and pleasure activist in New York City. As a journalist and critic, he has published 3 books about theater and written hundreds of articles for the New York Times, The Village Voice, Esquire, Rolling Stone, and other publications. His writings on gay sexuality include the books The Paradox of Porn, Notes on Gay Male Sexual Culture, and Daddy, Lover, God, A Sacred Intimate Journey. He has chronicled his psychosexual spiritual adventures in essays that have been included in numerous anthologies, including The Politics of Manhood, Best of the Best Gay Erotica, The Queerest Art Essays on Gay and Lesbian Theater, and Men Like Us, the GMHC Guide to Gay Men's Sexual, Physical, and Emotional Well-Being. His work as a teacher and community health activist revolves around healing through pleasure, adult sex education, and grounded daily spiritual practice. He is active on social media and maintains 2 blogs. One is Another Eye Opens, which is cultural commentary, and the other is Food for the Joy Body, which is smart thinking about sex, intimacy, and life in a body. An archive of his writing is available online at his website, donshewey.com. So,
Cool.
welcome.
Yay. Did you know you were all those things? Yeah.
And more.
And more. Yeah. Well, if they really want to know the more, they need to buy this lovely book. But you can plug that at the end.
Kirk is
So,
the book Daddy Lover God. For
yes.
those only listening, some people will be watching this and some will be listening. Is that true?
Oh, people will watch the video and listen. Yeah, I mean, we will put this out to about 1,000 folks. So yeah, however they're able to access this all over the internet.
It
So,
looks like Joseph Kramer is joining us.
oh yay!
Oh,
Wow,
welcome, Joseph.
it really is a tribe of both elders and family reunions,
Yes,
and yeah.
welcome, Nico from Sacramento. We have from the
Hey,
4
Nico.
corners of the globe. And then whoever is coming on. And if you have not already, please mute your audio for now. But anyway, we should
Yeah, we should get started. So tell us, the kind of the shtick, which is, first question is just to tell us about your journey, your spiritual journey, your awakenings, especially stories. And I know these lovely folks would love to hear some of your stories. So go for it.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by this question of, what is your spiritual journey? What are your spiritual awakenings? What are the moments, the turning points? It's one of the things I like about Krista Tippett's On Being podcast. She also always starts with, did you grow up spiritual? What was your family background?
Right.
My family background was definitely, my mother was devoutly Catholic. So as a 10-year-old, he took me to the priests and offered me as an altar boy. So that was my entry, I suppose, into spiritual life. Although, to be honest, Catholicism didn't really bite me. The story seemed a little unlikely, let's say. But I enjoyed being an altar boy because I liked being in the show. I guess I was a theater kid from very early on. I liked wearing a costume. I liked, this was back in the days when the mass was said in Latin. So I learned, the responses that an altar boy comes up with in Latin. And mainly, I can look back on it and see that being an altar boy, in a certain way, um, introduced me to the sense of ceremony, sense of ritual, sense that in a certain time and space with certain conditions, things happen that don't happen outside those conditions.
Mm.
Uh, Nobody ever put it that way, but my life has gone on to include many, many, many iterations of ceremonial practice, and that was the first. In terms of spiritual awakening, I think my next landmark was I was a huge Beatles fan. I loved the Beatles from the moment they came along. And somewhere around in the mid 60s, 66, 67, the Beatles started talking about their interest in meditation, uh, say psychedelics and meditation. And they talked about their teacher, the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. So as my father was in the military. I grew up on Air Force bases all over the world. So there I was, kind of crew-cutted um, adolescent, but I loved the Beatles, and anything they said interested me. So I followed
Mm.
their journey. They went to India and meditated, and eventually they got a little skeptical of their teacher for all the reasons that many spiritual teachers turn out to be human. Ha ha ha! Surprise, surprise.
Mhm.
So they didn't last too long with them, but still, the notion, that's where meditation entered my consciousness as a practice, and I would sit in my room
Stuck
and
there.
sit cross-legged and you know uh, burn incense and I want to say pretend to meditate, but I hadn't had any real instruction, but I kind of was curious about it. It was aspirational, let's say. So there are a few landmarks of how I followed the string of meditation in high school. In moved to South Jersey. My kind of cultural mentor was a man named Jay Junker, who introduced me to. He was a big Grateful Dead fan before like anyone knew about Deadheads, but he also, the thing that he held up kind of as his sort of Bible was the autobiography of a yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda, um,
Mhm.
who comes from the tradition of Vedanta, which is also the tradition that, um, Alice Coltrane, a musician I admired very much, he's a harp player, was married to John Coltrane, the great jazz saxophonist. Alice Coltrane had a beautiful album called Journey in Satchidananda with sitar and bass and uh,
Mm.
saxophone by Pharoah Sanders and her beautiful harp playing. And Vedanta is also the tradition that Christopher Isherwood studied in. And so when I came across his book, My Guru and His Disciple, that really excited me, and that tells his whole story of Christopher Isherwood, who wrote the Berlin Stories that the play and movie Cabaret was based on, and was a wonderful gay novelist and wrote a book called Christopher and His Kind, and someone I really followed a lot. But it was really unusual at the time for famous writers to talk about gurus and meditation and being a disciple. And I really learned a lot from Isherwood. Anyway, I followed those threads to sign up for something called, for a kind of series of meditations that a place called, I guess, I don't know what you call it, it was the church, they called it Self Realization Fellowship. And that was
Mhm.
the, I don't know, the lineage of Yogananda uh, resulted in the Self-Realization Fellowship. And you would sign up and you would get these meditations in the mail. And I followed that for a while. Um, this is in the 80s, really. And then, AIDS came along. So there are these like parallel tracks. So in the 80s, in the 70s and 80s, I was a journalist. I wrote about music and theater and lived in New York and had a partner in Boston, then moved to New York and was with another man for 14 years. And, you know, along came AIDS to interrupt our sense of everything, to overturn life in the gay world and make us newly conscious of mortality and community and connection and all the questions of life, right in front of our faces, about survival, taking care of ourselves and our friends, and people in our community who were dying. Um, that was a lot of questioning for me. And somebody that I went to school with, I went to Boston University, studied acting. I ran into my friend Walker on the street somewhere. I don't know, we were just talking about things, and he was someone who was very involved with Siddha Yoga, which is the lineage that the current head of that lineage is Guru Mai. Some people may know about Guru Mai. Siddha Yoga has an ashram in Oakland, but their center in the States is in upstate New York, and they also have a place in India, in not Pune. I forget where their place is in India, but anyway, Walker took me into Siddha Yoga. I went to retreats with Guru Mai, who was very cool, very interesting. Her teacher was Muktananda, who was another one of those swamis, gurus that a lot of people knew and talked about. And I read his books and I received his teachings through her. And she's very groovy. She's like she's a new age guru in that she's very tech savvy, and she's kind of like Laurie Anderson as a spiritual teacher, and was not at all into like diva worship. And really, when people wanted to make her like, I joke that people run up and say, "Who am I? Should I wipe once or twice?" And no, she was not having any of that. Even though people want to project all that stuff onto her. Then there came a day when I was reading a Muktananda book, and somebody asked him about homosexuality, and he went off on this tirade about how homosexuality is disgusting. And I like closed the book, put it away, and like, nope, I'm done with Muktananda. I'm done with City for now. Why is very, very gay friendly, but it just caused me to like back away from that lineage for a while. Meanwhile, all these other threads are going on. My Boston boyfriend, John Ward, whom some of you may know, went to one of the early Radical Fairy gatherings, I think the second one, and was talking that up to me. And he invited me along on a beautiful meditation retreat, which was called Insight and Opening. There was Jack Kornfield, who's a Buddhist meditation teacher, and Stan Grof, who's the guy who created holotropic breathwork. Actually, Stan Grof was one of the early researchers in LSD in the Czech Republic. And when LSD became illegal in the States, he went looking for another way to work with non-ordinary states of consciousness, and hit on this idea of breath work. So I attended this beautiful 3 or 4 day retreat in the desert by Palm Springs, Joshua Tree, with Jack Kornfield and Stan Grof. And it was a beautiful introduction to breath work for me, and Jack Kornfield, who's a wonderful teacher. So then I started following the Buddhist. Jack Kornfield belongs to kind of a group of Jubus, Jewish psychotherapists, who have done serious training in Buddhist meditation and Buddhist scholarship. And Jack Kornfield, in a certain way, became an important teacher for me over time. Starting in 1995, I did 3 10-day Vipassana retreats at Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts, which is the East Coast center for Jack Kornfield's school, let's say. At this very same time, in the early 90s, I'll say this because it's a fun story to tell. I had what I call my Madonna blessing. I was still a journalist, and in 1990, I had the opportunity to do a famous interview with Madonna, or got a chance to do an interview with Madonna, which I made famous because it was for the Advocate, which before the internet was, the best known gay national news magazine, but it had a pretty small circulation. But I did this interview with Donna around the time of her Truth or Dare movie, the documentary, and I asked her lots of very ballsy questions, and she loved it and answered it. Anyway, my agent sold that interview to the LA Times Syndicate, and it was reprinted
Mhm.
around the world in 19 countries and 11 languages, and earned me
Wow.
a tiny little chunk of money. But I then spent the next 2 or 3 years going to meditation retreats and men's gatherings and all kinds of inner work. Um, I was still, really deep in the throes of AIDS and friends getting sick and dying, and then around the same time as when I met Joe Kramer and first heard about the Body Electric School as uh, I heard about it from somebody that I met through the New York Jacks, who was the coordinator for New York Jacks, the sort of safe sex jerk off club in New York City. And so I thought, oh, sure, get naked with other guys and play with our dicks. And that sounds like fun to me. And it was fun, but I was really not prepared for how deeply the Body Electric work really touched my heart, brought
Mhm.
together my spiritual body, my emotional body, my physical body, my erotic body, and
Mhm.
just really revealed a lot of things to me about my emotional life and the connection between breath and touch and erotic energy. It really, that first workshop I did with Joseph Kramer, like, really was a life-changing experience. That weekend,
Mhm.
I've never been the same since. I learned a lot
Mhm.
from that, and became a kind of well, a little bit of a workshop junkie, going to all kinds of workshops and retreats of all different descriptions, gay spirit visions, um, men and masculinity conferences, fairy gatherings at Short Mountain Sanctuary and other places. But Body Electric really became the center of my existence, and I took
Mhm.
every workshop that was offered. I interviewed Joe for did a long interview for an article for the Village Voice, which came out in 1991 or 92, I think. And I only used a little bit of the interview for the article, but the entire interview was republished in my new book, Daddy Lover God, which is, in a certain way, it really centers on my experience with Body Electric, and it's a 400-page advertisement for the Body Electric School, and and Joseph's teachings, which it's really entered me very deeply. And one of the things that Joe talked about uh, in the interview that we did was this emerging idea in his head of sacred intimate training that was based on what he'd heard about and gleaned about the ancient tradition of the sacred prostitute or temple prostitute. Some of the people that, in certain cultures in the past, uh, it was set up that you could go to certain temples and have sex with somebody when you wanted to connect with the divine. There are these various traditions. They're, a little bit under the radar, but Tantra and, the various forms of spiritual practice that embraced sexuality. Unlike, Western cultures, spirit and God and religion is here and sex is over here, and you better not do it too much, you better not talk about it too much, and if you do and when you do, you have to go to confession and confess your sins. Well, that's not been the case all over the world, and the way Joe Kramer, a lot of you know, and the funny kind of describing Joseph in front of him, but he's just like dives deep into whatever he's curious about, and so his teaching
Mhm.
is full of
Mhm.
what he's read and what he's studied, and he's full of ideas and happy to pass them along. And I was like just a very receptive student. I just soaked up what he was teaching. I took this. He offered something called Sacred Intimate Training. Um, and I took that training three of the first four trainings that were offered. Joseph did the first two, and other people taught it after that. But that was an opportunity to bring together the elements of Tantra, the elements of celebrating the body erotic, but also acknowledging um, the AIDS epidemic and for gay men, something that was very, very central to what was going on for us. And, uh, Joseph's conception of sacred intimacy was very related to being midwives to the dying, holding space for people who are sick and dying, uh, and not just in the kind of GMHC buddy way, which I was doing all of that. I was volunteering with Gay Men's Health Crisis and working with people and doing people's laundry and bringing them meals and so forth. But Joseph's idea of sacred intimacy was really about conceiving the idea of supporting people being in their erotic bodies as they return to spirit. I learned all this language about how do we think about death and dying other than this like terrifying, void that we just like nihilistically disappear into. What if you think of the continuum of life, of this life and previous lives, or just connection to nature, connection to spirit, and how does that show up in our bodies, in our lives? How does sexuality give us kind of a paradigm or for understanding energy, understanding sexuality as energy, understanding life as energy. And, 20th century, the great scientists like Einstein taught us, something about energy being immortal, timeless, unmeasurable. And so it was very, very intriguing to encounter these ideas through Joseph Kramer and the Body Electric School that to me pulled together the ceremonial aspects of being an altar boy, my curiosity about meditation and serenity and world culture beyond beyond I've had a hard time with religions that ask you to believe a certain series of facts or a series of things as if they're facts. And I'm like, I don't know, this, being nailed to a cross and then dying and being reborn, and I don't know, I don't know. That sounds like a beautiful fairy tale. I don't know if I believe that actually happened. So don't ask me to believe it actually happened. But I totally get that, Jesus's story of love and message of love is something that's very powerful, and it means a lot to a lot of people, and means something to me, even if I'm not so interested in the dogma or the catechism, the things that Joe Kramer and Tantra and Buddhist teaching were philosophical in nature. They weren't about dogma. They weren't about you must believe this, you must agree with this, that, and the other thing. So all of that really opened me up. I felt like I was really stepping into. I was waiting all my life for some opportunity to kind of connect these dots. And Body Electric was a big part of that. There's a nature piece to it. I heard about the notion of vision quest, of the tradition of going out into the wilderness and doing, some version of a 3-day solo fast. This is that period when, 35, I was in my late 30s, and that's a time that's very crucial. It's the seasons of a man's life, of a person's life. It's when you're starting to let go of youth and you're starting to really question, what is my purpose? What am I here for? How can I understand, the world? And there's so many doorways into it. And thanks to my Madonna blessing, I had some resources to check these things out and go spend a week in Wyoming at a former ranch with some very cool people who took us out to, the high desert in Wyoming. And, I spent 3 days, by myself with just water. It's a little different from my life here in Midtown Manhattan. But I did a couple of retreats like that. And I spent 6 months up in Mendocino County in California on a kind of similar retreat. Two other steps. This is a lot, I know, but as I say this, I know that I'm far from alone. That some people have one path that they followed continuously. I was going to say Thomas Merton, but I don't even think Thomas Merton had only one path. We all have a lot of things that feed our souls and feed our spiritual awareness and our spiritual growth. yoga was definitely a part of that. Um, Yoga was part of meditation practice. I mean, hatha yoga, as we know it, were physical exercises that really were created in order to prepare people's bodies to sit for periods of time for meditation. So I loved, studying yoga, learning to prepare my body, be more supple for my own health, and I've gone through a few different traditions of yoga. I'm currently studying Iyengar yoga, which is a
Huh?
particular branch of yoga that I love. I have a teacher I'm very devoted to, and do a little bit of yoga every day, but take a class with him every Monday. Um, the Probably the last piece, or newest piece, or new addition to my spiritual journey is one that has a lot of precursors, but um, Uh, I met my husband Andy in 2008. We started going together in 2009, and in 2010 we went to Burning Man together. And I had always been curious about Burning Man. I'd heard about this wacky arts festival in the desert where people run around naked and take a lot of drugs. There's one version of it. It's also a higher octave. It's a gift economy. It's a temporary utopia. It's uh, uh, no money exchanges hands. There's a higher octave of it, which is kind of an art festival, and then the kind of lower octave is 24/7 frat party. Anyway, when Andy and I went for the first time, he had been twice before. We did mushrooms on the playa, and suddenly Burning Man made sense to me. The lights,
Mm,
energy. It was
mm, mm,
it was I had never I had taken acid a couple of times. I think I'd done a little bit of mushrooms at some point. I'd smoked pot occasionally, but I was really not into drugs because I was so careerist and I was so intent on accomplishing and getting places and my career and
mm,
being a journalist and getting ahead, and um, those things scared me a little bit because they didn't seem to support that, or whatever, which is just as well, because when I came around to exploring plant medicine, teacher plants, and master molecules, I wasn't a kid anymore. So I brought a mature spiritual um, attitude to exploring psychedelics, and that's actually really helpful to really get something out of
mm,
psychedelics. It really helps to have a grounding in meditation and an ability to inhabit non-ordinary states of consciousness and stay in yourself and be open to spiritual experience, whatever comes your way. So that got me very curious. When I turned 60, I decided to do what a lot of my friends had done, which is go to Peru and um,
mm,
uh, do some retreats with ayahuasca, very deep shamanic uh, plant medicine that has been used for a long time for various healing purposes. And I'd been curious about it, but I didn't think it was really a good idea to just, it's a really serious medicine that's very important to and sacred to the Shipibo people in the rainforest jungle, and I didn't want to do it casually or lightly. It just didn't seem respectful. But when I was turning 60, I had questions about 60. Suddenly seemed old to me. Never minded aging. Happy to turn 40, happy to turn 50. 60 started to sound a little old, started to look a little old, uh, and I had questions. So I thought that's what you take to a teacher. I brought questions about what is my purpose as an elder? What does it mean to step into elderhood?
mm,
That turned out to be a great context, being back in the jungle with, you know,
mm,
the the I probably shouldn't name names because it is a kind of protected community, but the people who ran the retreats, and I went to 2 years in a row, were very experienced, very wise. One of them is no longer with us, but really transmitted like everything he knows about
mm,
all of life, like
mhm,
from the purpose of life and plant medicine to how to give medicine to animals. So I just downloaded a lot of material. So those experiences with ayahuasca led me to further explorations with other psychedelics that have been very, very meaningful to me. Understanding mortality, death, life, seeing dying as merging with infinity, which is only a beautiful and attractive proposition if you can let go, but it means surrendering your individual identity. And so your ego is not always so happy to let go. But if you can let your ego soften back, you get this image, this experience of merging with infinity, unitive consciousness that has really been a very important contribution to my world and thinking. That's all.
Wow, wow. Well, there were a lot of threads and we have quite a tapestry in front of us now. So thank you. Thank you for that. And I know there are many, and I can imagine the field of men who are watching as well as the men who are going to watch the tape of this have lots of curious stories where I think the book will help fill in some of the juicy parts of translating all of that. So yeah, thank you for priming the pump. So let's move into the next question, which is always about us being a queer tribe and how that resonates with you or how you see it, if that's true or not.
Right. I know this is a core question for your podcast and your inquiry. And I can't help but bring to it the journalist in me, the writer in me. And so when I think about that question, I start by questioning the terms. So what we mean by queer, what we mean by tribe. There's a lot to unpack there, right?
Yes.
So queer means a lot of things these days. And I love it. I love watching the evolution of queer culture, that we've gone from gay and lesbian, LGBT, the sort of alphabet, the letters have gotten more numerous. Queer tends to be a kind of big umbrella that people can embrace who just don't identify with traditional gender role assignments. And it's funny. I grew up. I would say I identify as a gay man. I'll include myself in queer as the big umbrella, and I'm aware that the population of people who identify as gay and the population of people who identify as queer, or let's say gay men and queer, are not identical. There's an overlap, but they're not. It's not 100% overlap. So I'm always interested. Like I feel like I like and welcome and encourage a very nuanced understanding of the word queer, rather than assuming that we're all meaning the same thing when we use the word queer. Tribe is another word that, just in this particular historical period, is a somewhat contested term, because I think we all grew up with it associating tribes as Native American people. I'm aware that even Native Americans these days don't really use the term tribe, don't really like it, refer to peoples or nations. And so to use the word tribe, to my mind, means entering this delicate territory of acknowledging the linguistic evolution of how we talk about, in Canada they call them First Nation people, the indigenous population, Native Americans. I'm drawn to. I'm less drawn to, to use a fancy word, reifying tribes as a thing. But I like the idea, and I think I probably heard this from Joe Kramer first, of tribal consciousness. I can relate to tribal consciousness, and I think that in a funny way, there's all these evolutionary terms, right? Like gay community, gay sensibility, um, uh, gay consciousness, um, and those words all kind of tend to suggest a kind of monolithic version of all those things. Anyone, who kind of inspects that for more than a minute has to kind of really notice that none of them is monolithic. There's not one gay community. There's not one gay sensibility. There's not one gay tribe, queer tribe. Um, I came out in Boston in the early 70s into a very robust, politically minded gay community. My first writings, sort of professional or semi-professional, I didn't get paid, but my first professional writing and reviews were for gay community news. And in Boston, it did seem like there was a gay community that welcomed you when you came out, and there were things that happened because of the gay community. I've come to see that there are multiple gay communities. That community does not mean uh, we all think alike and we all agree on everything. Tony Kushner, the playwright who wrote Angels in America, and who's a pretty hardcore um, Marxist and philosophical scholar, a conversation I had with him, talked about, that's very important to see community as not like everybody like-minded who all agree on the same thing. No, community has to mean uh, people with a common cause, but from various uh, points of view. And so that's the way that I embrace the notion of gay community. Queer tribe to me is a kind of variation on gay community. When I think of tribes and communities, I also think of it in relation to ACT UP, the AIDS activist organization that I was very much a part of when it started, would have these when there were big actions, big demonstrations that took place, we would form what they called affinity groups, so that rather than trying to herd 3,000 cats or 200 cats, you'd have affinity groups, so small groups that could get things done, um, efficiently and quickly. And so the notion of affinity groups is you would find people who wanted to work on the same, if you wanted to work on housing issues, if you wanted to work on harm reduction, needle exchange, there's affinity for that. So I like this notion of affinity groups. And again, I think that's a little bit what we talk about when we talk about queer tribe, is probably a collection of affinity groups, many affinity groups. In this group, it's ostensibly white, cisgender gay men are a subset of the queer tribe. And I think probably all of us could say that we are really aware there are many subcultures, affinity groups, subreddits, uh, that are part of this thing called queer tribe.
Beautiful. Great. Yeah, for 10 years we've been asking this question, and it keeps changing as we keep changing. So I love the conversation. I love the musings about it. And for all our viewers, if you want to go through kind of 10 years of history of how men have responded, we've got our archives of how men have responded, and it's juicy and it keeps changing. So I love the question because it kind of opens us up to well, who are we? What are we doing here? What are our contributions that tribalism, tribal consciousness, as you put it, really brings forth, and that I believe really needs to be brought forth in these times. The more we can all be our authentic selves, collectively, individually, the more the planet's going to heal. But that's just my spin. So
Here's a little suggestion or initiative or challenge. Say, um, uh, wouldn't it be cool if there were resources and, let's say, an intern who could curate all the
yeah,
answers to the question, "What's a queer tribe?" and
yeah,
do like 5 minute or 10 minute précis
great.
all the
Thank you.
of the evolution of
Yeah,
people's.
yeah, yeah. Thank you, thank you. You just formulated a question that I've been recently putting out to the universe. Like, would somebody come along and take all of these archives and distill it down into something that would be beneficial to us? Great, yummy. So let's move to the last one and leave just a couple of minutes. Oh, go ahead.
Somebody has his hand up, and
I was Chat GPT could listen to it all and write it out. Honestly.
Oh, I missed that.
He's talking about
The AI.
Oh,
The AI.
right. Yeah, oh, right. AI. Yeah. Thank you. I prefer a human at the moment. Yes, thank you. All right, moving on to the last juicy question, and then we'll open it up for just a couple minutes because I see our time's really flying by. So last question is about your vision for us as a tribe, as a movement, as gay men, however you want to bracket that. But what's your vision for us?
Yeah, I found that question challenging. I don't consider myself much of a visionary. Joe Kramer and Toby Johnson are two people who really have done a lot of things in the world based on their
Yes.
visionary nature, and you guys with flesh and spirit. But if I have one, I don't know if I call it vision, desire, hope, motto, is it is my desire that our to the extent that people identify with a queer tribe, to be weird. Let yourself be weird. Be yourself. Be weird. Don't be afraid of, not conforming. Don't be afraid of being different. It's a very core challenge because we all want to be accepted. We all want approval, and the best thing about gay life is being invited. Just throw the cards up in the air and reshuffle them the way that serves myself individually, serves each one of us, and we get to be that. You don't have to be somebody else. You don't have to take your standards from other people. Who would want to? So it is a we all grow up with all kinds of incentives and societal pressure to conform and be like others and color within the lines. You don't have to do that. You can be yourself. It takes courage, and it really helps to have support and community or affinity group or tribal posse, whatever you want to call it. But that's my
great. Great. Be weird. Yeah, great. So we can let you guys unmute one at a time. We just got a few minutes, and then leave the last moments for you to plug your book or anything else that's going on. But anybody have a question or comment that you want to address to Don?
I'm going to say first real quick, I hadn't been tracking names, so I see you, Barbara. I just want to say I was tracking who are here, so we have female identified people.
Absolutely.
And watching as well. So let's make space and welcome, everybody who's.
Absolutely. Yeah, she holds a lot of grace for us in the work that we've been doing, and has been doing this with women as well as part of the collective that we do. So thank you for honoring her. So welcome everybody. And so is there a question or comment from anybody?
Go ahead and just unmute yourself. Don't wait for us to call on you. We may not see you. So just go ahead.
Thank you, Don. This is Nico. My question was the last question that Kirk had asked about your vision or what you see. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you for making the time. Very glad and grateful to hear about you. I don't have a question since you answered it, but I just wanted to squeeze that in right now. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Don, a light question. Why this book now, From You to the World?
It's an excellent question. Richard's asking about my book, Daddy, Lover, God, A Sacred Intimate Journey, Emerging from the Forest. It's a book that I wrote mostly 20 years ago to understand my own experience starting a sacred intimate practice and keeping journals, keeping notes on sessions to understand what I was doing. Partly because I'm a writer, it's how I understand my experience. I tried to have it published years ago. I had an agent, sent it around to mainstream publishers, but it was a little too sexually explicit. I think even my agent was a little embarrassed. He mostly handled my theater books. So I put it away for a while. But, you know, partly it was as a result of the last book that I published, The Paradox of Porn, Notes on Gay Male Sexual Culture, which I published myself. I created a small press called Joy Body Books, and I had a very satisfying experience publishing that, distributing it, getting a response, going around and talking to groups about it. And so I thought I had a very strong picture of what I wanted this book to be, what I wanted it to look like. And frankly, I didn't care what anybody else thought. So I wasn't so interested in letting someone else have their say about what it should be. And I don't know, it seemed right. I seemed ready, you know, in a certain way. I'm getting older. I had a psychotherapy practice for 22, 25 years, and I'm just cycling out of my psychotherapy practice and kind of returning to my life as a writer. So publishing this book feels like that kind of commitment, returning to my life as a writer. At the same time, you know, most of the book takes place pre-internet, and so we're just far enough distant from the time that I started out that it becomes in a certain way a historical document. Certainly I see the quite long, very interesting interview with Joseph as a historical document, that this is a real, it's been online for years, but it's kind of a juicy and beautiful and elegant way to show it.
Great, great. Thank you. Any last question? And then we'll just go with a closing comment. Anybody?
Well, could I ask a very big question that may be too big
Sure.
to even answer, but what do you think pleasure is?
Oh my.
I love that question, Toby. That's a great question. Next question.
Isn't this one of the big questions of our lives?
Oh, it's huge.
Yeah.
You know, and I love your asking it, Toby, because it is a huge question. And, you know, I blithely describe myself as a pleasure activist, and I offer what I call healing through pleasure. But in my experience, I have learned that for many people, pleasure is a very contested thing. There are lots of pressure. I've noticed, because women have told me pleasure is very complicated for women, because women are mostly socialized to take care of other people and not to prioritize their own existence, their own pleasure. That was interesting to take that in. And I've had, you know, people come to me, a relatively recent client say to me, I don't get pleasure from pleasure, which cracks me up. What do you mean? But I'm pretty sure what he meant is sex, that sex, there's so much pressure and so much expectation around sex that it becomes the opposite of pleasure. It's not easy. It doesn't bring comfort and joy to people's bodies. But that's what I consider pleasure is, something that brings pleasure that you want to repeat. Does that make sense?
Great question.
Toby, do you have a different way to succinctly characterize pleasure?
Oh, well, you know, given my background, I'm going to go off in the dimensions of divine consciousness and experience of the creative force in the universe living in us in that dimension of reality, which is what gives it a very positive spin. I just want to put, we need to give a positive spin to it, because the world is so embarrassed by it that they give a negative spin. And Don, you know, in your work, as I read in the porn book and stuff, and you know, that's what I see you presenting, and that's why I came tonight. You know, I love that in you.
Thank you. I appreciate those words, Toby. And I will say also that, you know, one of my culture heroes is James Hillman, who was a Jungian psychologist, psychotherapist, ran the Jung Institute in Zurich after Jung died. And he demonstrated, he modeled for me and verbalized intellectual life as a pleasure. We can often think of intellect and thought and cognition as being kind of dry and heady and the opposite of embodied. But for a lot of people, and you know, a bunch of you here know that it can be extremely pleasurable finding the right words to describe something, using your mind to put ideas together. That's a whole other realm of pleasure that I treasure.
Great. Well, thank you, Toby, for asking. Thank you, Don, for exploring that. And it's something that's so germane. In fact, I can't wait to get this call out to the folks that, you know, we're doing a workshop this weekend that's been all about practicing death and dying through ecstatic states and using pleasure as the vehicle of consciousness. So you guys are perfect weavers of the threads that we've been trying to work with as well. Beautiful questions. And I think we're going to have to close because we're already going over. So any last words from you?
Yes, I do want to mention a retreat that I'm co-facilitating next February in Mexico. I've been doing retreats lately. I've been letting writing being part of my teaching. But my friend Michael Mele, who runs a company called Il Chiostro, and I have talked for years about doing a workshop for gay men and the art of aging gracefully. So we're doing a long program in Merida, Mexico, which is in the Yucatan, next February 14th to the 21st, called Gay Men and the Art of Aging Gracefully. You can look for it online. If you want more information, I'm happy to pass it along. It's going to be at a beautiful new kind of retreat center that's just emerging in Merida, and it's a small group. It'll be 7 to 10 guys, and one for whom the concept of aging gracefully really calls out to you. I'd love to invite you to consider joining us in Merida, which is a beautiful place to be in February.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, sounds juicy. And your contact information is on our site. If anybody doesn't have it, you can repeat it one last time before we say adieu.
So, you know, donshewey.com. I mean, if you Google Don Shewey, Shewey, lots of stuff comes up that will lead you to my various workshops, my various websites, writings, blogs, books, etc.
Great.
I'm really grateful to you guys, Kirk and Donny. You know, you guys really hold down the fort. This doesn't happen by itself. It's a lot of work. And I really appreciate the commitment you guys have done to create this little community, this podcast about something you feel passionate about. This is, you know, you're wonderful at it, and stay weird.
Absolutely. I love that. I'll be using that a lot. So thank you all for being with us.
Yes, thank you all so very much.
Yeah.
It's always a joy to see you, and especially our very international community this time. Wow, that's pretty cool.
Right.
And Benny, do you want to?
We actually have another call at the end of the month with a new writer, and his name, and I've not even heard how to pronounce his last name. Monteclavo, I think. Monteclavo. And any rate, David will be on the 28th, I believe it is. But anyway, if you're on our email list, you'll get the announcement. And he's writing a book about gay spirituality. So I think he's got some juicy things to tell us.
Oh my, yes. I want to hear about him.
All right. Well, thank you all. Namaste. We love you all for being in our lives.
Everyone have a good evening.
Guys.
our day in Sydney.
Great.
Everybody.
Good night.